Did you know that in 1991, Slack created the first US website? You're listening to the Daily Brew from the Stanford Daily. This is Chloe Barreau
and Leily Rezvani. This week, we're talking about computer science culture at Stanford. Lyndsey has the story.
At Stanford, we love our acronyms. Coho, FLOMO, FROSICO, you name it, we have it. But there's one acronym like no other.
CS. CS? Yeah, I like CS.
But when I came here, I decided to take
CS.
Because everyone's doing CS.
Welcome to the CS world at Stanford.
Based on the most recent data published by the School of Engineering, more than half of current undergraduate engineering students are CS students. Classes like CS 106A, the introductory CS class at Stanford, are popular even among students who don't plan on pursuing CS. More than 90% of undergraduates take the class during their time at Stanford.
I actually was and still am pre-med, but I'm choosing to major in CS. I decided to take CS 106A just because I've heard it's like a really good class and well taught, and I realized it was probably the best taught class I've ever taken at Stanford. Stanford probably has some of the best CS resources. It would kind of be a waste not to take advantage of them.
Other students express concerns over the growing presence of CS on campus, especially regarding the effects of groupthink and ethical implications. Are we selling out? Are we doing CS for the right reasons? And what else is out there, lying beyond CS?
Stanford is known to having a really, really good program in CS, and we're really close to Silicon Valley. But I think there's also like a social pressure for people to study CS if they're undecided, and I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go.
I think that CS culture at Stanford in particular, people don't really give enough thought to the consequences of their actions. And there's just like this idea that progress is not only inevitable, but inherently good. And people don't, in my opinion, pause enough to consider the consequences of their action, whether that's with AI or just programming in general. Things like Palantir, their entire purpose is to develop technologies to imprison bodies, right, and to track down other bodies. Or just like corporate irresponsibility at Amazon and Facebook. I think like we see direct lines from the way that CS is sort of taught here as like an inevitable march towards some future progress rather than like a malleable future that we can change and shape based on what we view as a good world.
There's a lot of stigma around CS about it being cutthroat and competitive.
I felt that it's a bit of a gravity well when you want to explore other things. I personally think of it as a tool to interact with the world and not the world itself.
There's definitely a culture of people who do CS, but I see it more as like if you're peripherally interested in CS, you get steered towards CS versus other technical majors.
I think there's a lot of students who sort of feel pressured to take 106A and to get with it and to feel at home within the Valley. I think there's also a little bit of maybe snidiness to people who aren't tech literate. Just because I think it is sort of, a second language for many people within the community.
In his plenary lecture for the Education as Self-Fashioning course last quarter, Rob Reach, professor of political science and director of the Center for Ethics and Society at Stanford, used a conveyor belt as an analogy for the linear path students may take if they choose CS for the wrong motivations. Students may mindlessly hop on the conveyor belt by taking 106A and follow the CS course sequence towards a foreseeable software engineering job without giving intentional thought to their rationale. Ram Kapoor, the TA for CS 106A, shared his perspective on the class and CS at Stanford overall.
I'm the head TA of CS 106A. This is my second quarter doing that. Previous to that, I was a section leader for CS 106A and CS 106B. In terms of my experience, it's been incredible. I've had a lot of fun doing it, and I think there's a lot of things that make TAing the class super unique. The first of which is it's just an incredibly large class. There were close to 450 students last quarter. There are 400 students this quarter. But in addition, I think there's this incredible sense of excitement that characterizes the class. Everyone doing it is excited to be doing computer science for the first time, and it's awesome to be a part of that, be it as a student, a section leader, a TA, or finally like the instructor themselves. Everyone is so excited to be doing this class, but at the same time I think it's also got a huge responsibility in terms of kind of the way we set students up for the future.
There was an ESF lecture last quarter, and it was
They use the analogy of CS 106A as like the beginning of a conveyor belt that sends students on this entire sequence of CS classes. And like once you hop on the conveyor belt, it's kind of a one-way street. To what extent do you think that's true, and whether that kind of culture does exist here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think that's entirely wrong for a lot of students. I think a lot of students do CS and they realize either they enjoy it or that they're good at it and so on, and they do start moving forward. But I don't necessarily think that represents every student or even anywhere close to every student. So for what it's worth, I took CS 106A, but I'm not a CS major. I majored in symbolic systems. And while I've done a lot of computer science, I've never felt pushed to do computer science because everyone else was doing it or because I felt obliged to, but rather because there were classes I was genuinely interested in. Equally, I know a ton of my previous students aren't computer science majors, but have remained like history majors or American studies or psychology majors and are using computer science however they see fit. So I definitely agree that there is this stereotype that after you do CS 106, you're sort of inexorably pulled towards further CS classes, and there are absolutely students who feel that way. But we try our hardest as a class not to sort of make students feel obliged as though they have to do the next class or anything like that.
And then what's your general opinion of the entire CS culture here at Stanford?
CS culture at Stanford is interesting, and I think it's interesting for two reasons. Number one, it, as will come as no surprise to anyone, is incredibly prevalent over here, be it through classes or the kinds of projects students work on outside of classes and so on and so forth. But I think at the same time, there's this incredible sense of excitement and optimism about computer science in terms of the kinds of problems it can solve moving forwards. So, for instance, some of the examples I can sort of very easily come to mind are CS for Social Good, which I've sort of been associated with for a while now. Equally, in our final lectures for CS 106A, both last quarter and presumably this quarter, we'll be talking a lot about how CS can be used to increase social good and things. And our last assignment, in fact, we're revamping to be kind of like a disaster reporting app where you can sort of crowdsource information about a disaster that's happened and things like that. So I think that's a really cool thing. I do think sometimes people feel maybe a little pressure to participate in this some way or the other when it's not necessarily something they want to do. And for what it's worth, as a teacher, I try and like avoid that wherever possible and make it clear that doing CS should be a choice and not a necessity, and there are absolutely meaningful things you can do without it. But in my own opinion, I think in general the department, or at least the introductory portion of the department, does a fairly good job like making clear that CS, if you want it to be, is no more than a tool and not necessarily something you ever have to use.
I think what we need is like actual discussions of ethics within CS. So like impact, like a class on like progress, a class on like corporate responsibility and like what social good actually looks like. I think we just need broader responsibility to the CS department for the companies they bring, because ultimately Stanford grads are some of the most talented CS people in the country, and funneling that talent towards companies like that is, in my mind, completely irresponsible.
This episode was produced by Chloe Barreau, Leily Rezvani, and Lyndsey Kong, with help from Emma Bowers and Rachel Koo. Sophomore Trace Guzman will be leading us out with a cover of Ain't No Sunshine.
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's not warm when she's away. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. This house just ain't no home anytime she goes away. Wonder this time where she's gone. Wonder if she's gonna stay. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. This house just ain't no home anytime she goes away. And I know, you ain't gotta leave the young thing alone. Ain't no sunshine.